The sun was just beginning to set over the golden plains of South Africa when something unusual caught the attention of a young male lion. He was part of a pride known to frequent this part of the reserve, a massive, majestic creature with a thick, dark mane and amber eyes that scanned every movement across the savanna. Normally, he'd be tracking prey or lounging beneath the shade of a tree. But tonight, his behavior was different. His nose twitched, catching a scent that didn't belong. It wasn't the scent of antelope or wildebeest. It was human. And not just human. It was fear. Meanwhile, not too far away, the wildlife ranger team at the reserve was growing uneasy. Sarah, a dedicated and fearless ranger in her early 30s, hadn't checked in for several hours. She was known for her solo patrols, moving deep into the wilderness with only a radio, her backpack, and a calm presence that somehow made even the most dangerous animals keep their distance. But tonight, her radio had gone silent, and that wasn't like her. Sarah had always had a deep bond with the animals. She'd spent years studying lion behavior, tracking prides, and even rescuing injured cubs. Locals often called her the Lion Whisperer, though she never liked the name. She believed it wasn't magic. It was just respect. She respected their space, their strength, and their wildness. And in return, somehow they seemed to respect her. But something had gone very wrong. Back near the edge of the forest, the lion's pace quickened. He wasn't hunting. His steps were cautious but steady, ears flicking forward. The scent was getting stronger, and then just beyond a thicket of thorny brush, he saw it. Something was moving, struggling. There, tied to the base of a tree with rough rope, was Sarah. Her khaki ranger uniform was dusty and torn, her face pale but alert. She wasn't unconscious, not yet, but she looked exhausted, dehydrated, and confused. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back, and she kept trying to call out, but her voice was hoarse. She had been there for hours. The lion stopped just a few feet away. His massive form towered over her, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. No wind, no birds, just the quiet hum of danger hanging in the air. Sarah froze. She knew this lion. She recognized the scar over his left eye, the way his left ear twitched ever so slightly. He was part of a pride she had monitored for over a year. He had never come this close before, never this directly. What was he going to do? Her mind raced. She didn't know how she'd gotten there. The last thing she remembered was checking a trail camera near the boundary fence. She'd heard a rustling in the bushes, and then darkness. She must have been ambushed. But by who? And why? And now, out of all the creatures that could have found her first, it was a lion. But this wasn't an ordinary encounter. The lion stepped forward slowly. He wasn't growling. He wasn't baring his teeth. He just stood there, watching her, ears alert. Then he did something no one, not even Sarah, could have expected. And what happened next? It's the kind of moment that makes you question everything you thought you knew about wild animals, about instincts, about connection. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't move. She just met his gaze, quietly hoping, silently praying that whatever bond they'd built over the past year would be stronger than his primal instincts. But time was running out. The sun had almost disappeared behind the horizon. The night would bring other predators, hyenas, leopards, even poachers. And Sarah was still tied to that tree. What she didn't know was that help was coming, but it might not arrive fast enough. And the lion, well, he wasn't going anywhere. This was the moment where everything changed. So how did she get tied up in the first place? Who did it? Why was the lion acting so strangely calm, almost protective? And what happened in the next few minutes would not only shock everyone back at the reserve, but it would spread across the internet, sparking debates among wildlife experts, conservationists, and people who had never set foot in Africa. Because what happened next defied all expectations. And it all started with a lion discovering a female ranger tied to a tree. The lion didn't move. He just stood there, watching her, his tail flicking slowly behind him. Sarah could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. Every second stretched on endlessly. But still, he didn't lunge. He didn't growl. He simply watched her, almost as if trying to decide something. Then, without warning, he turned his head sharply to the left. His ears twitched. Something else was out there. Sarah couldn't see through the thick brush behind him, but she knew the lion had heard something. And he wasn't relaxed anymore. His posture shifted. Shoulders tightened. He was on alert now. That's when the real fear crept in. Sarah wasn't just alone with a lion in the middle of the wilderness. Someone else was nearby. Someone who had tied her up and left her in this vulnerable state. And the lion, he might not be the threat at all. Bridges cracked in the distance. Footsteps, not running, but careful. Deliberate. Whoever it was, they were trying not to be heard. But the lion had already noticed. His head lowered slightly, and a low, almost inaudible rumble came from deep in his chest. Sarah turned her head as best she could, heart racing. She couldn't see much, but she caught a glimpse of something, or someone, moving behind the trees. Not in uniform. Not another ranger. Then a voice. Calm, too calm. Didn't expect him to find you so fast, the man said, stepping out from the trees. He wore outdoor gear, but not from the reserve. His face was partially covered with a scarf, but his eyes were cold. Calculated. Sarah didn't recognize him, but she immediately knew he wasn't here by accident. The lion growled, louder this time, taking a single step forward. Easy, the man said, not taking his eyes off the big cat. Not here for you. Then he looked down at Sarah, almost amused. But you were supposed to stay out here a bit longer. Just long enough for the others to move in. Others. Sarah's stomach dropped. She knew there had been whispers lately, rumors among rangers about poachers getting bolder. Not just hunting for horns or pelts anymore, but infiltrating protected areas, even staging animal attacks to cover their tracks. She'd never believed it. Until now. The lion growled again, louder. He took another step, placing himself between Sarah and the man. And that's when everything changed. A sharp whistle echoed from the trees, followed by two more figures appearing behind the first. They were carrying equipment, drones, cameras, and tranquilizer guns. But this wasn't a rescue team. These men were here for something else. They weren't just poachers. They were planning something bigger. Get rid of him, one of them muttered. But the lion didn't back down. He stayed rooted in place, his body low, his muscles tense. Sarah couldn't believe what she was seeing. He wasn't just curious anymore. He was protecting her. It made no sense. Lions don't protect humans. Not like this. One of the men raised a tranquilizer gun, aimed and fired. The dart missed. The lion lunged. But not toward Sarah. Chaos exploded. In the blur of movement, Sarah lost sight of what was happening. She heard yelling, snarling, more gunshots, non-lethal ones, but still enough to panic the animals nearby. Birds scattered from trees. A herd of impalas dashed through the grass in the distance. Sarah ducked her head and tried to crawl backward despite being tied. The rope burned her skin. Her heart was hammering. Somewhere in the chaos, one of the drones lifted off the ground and zipped through the air, recording everything. They weren't just here to hunt. They were planning to make it look like an animal attack and stream it live. They wanted to manipulate public outrage, maybe to cover their illegal actions, maybe to profit from it. Whatever it was, Sarah was now at the center of it. And the lion, he wasn't backing down. But how long could he hold them off? The situation had spiraled beyond anything she'd imagined. What started as a routine patrol had turned into a staged disappearance, a confrontation with poachers, and now, an animal standing between her and a group of armed men who weren't afraid to cross any line. The sun was now completely gone. The only light came from the moon and the blinking red eyes of the drone in the sky. Sarah was still tied to the tree, and the men weren't done yet. The worst part, this was just the beginning. The air was thick with tension. The lion stood his ground, snarling, muscles coiled like springs. The poachers hesitated, just long enough for Sarah to hear the one sound she'd been desperate for all along, a radio crackle. Then a voice. Unit 2 to base, visual on flare. Moving in. Repeat, moving in. Sarah's heart leaped. She had managed to activate her emergency flare hours before losing consciousness, but she hadn't known if it worked. Apparently it had. Reinforcements were coming. The poachers hadn't heard the message, but they must have sensed something was changing. The lead man cursed under his breath and barked orders to the others. One of them started packing up the drone while another scanned the horizon with a flashlight. The lion didn't move, his growls deepening, teeth bared. Then headlights. Far off, bouncing through the trees, getting closer. Time to go, the man hissed, shoving a bag into the arms of one of the others. But before they could retreat fully into the brush, the lion lunged again. Not recklessly, but with precision, enough to scatter them in panic. One man stumbled hard and dropped his tranquilizer gun. They ran. The lion didn't chase. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, ears back, chest heaving. Moments later, a reserve truck burst through the trees and skidded to a stop near Sarah. Rangers jumped out, flashlights sweeping across the scene, weapons raised just in case. One of them sprinted to Sarah and immediately began cutting the rope. "You're okay now," he said, breathless, checking her pulse. "We've got you." Sarah could barely speak. Her voice rasped from dehydration and shock, but she managed a hoarse whisper. "The lion, he saved me." Another ranger glanced up and froze. The lion was still there, just watching. Then, without any sound, he turned and disappeared into the tall grass, like a ghost fading back into the wild. The poachers were caught not long after. The ranger teams coordinated quickly, using the drone signal to track their direction. 2 were arrested that same night. The third was found the next morning hiding under a broken part of the fence, trying to escape with a hard drive full of drone footage and files revealing their plan. They had been staging animal attacks in protected areas, filming them, and using the footage to manipulate conservation donations and traffic to fake websites. Sarah had been in their way. In the days that followed, the story spread quickly. News outlets picked it up. Wildlife organizations launched investigations, and Sarah, once just another quiet ranger doing her job, was suddenly at the center of something much bigger. But all she could think about was that lion. She returned to the same spot a week later, standing near the same tree where she'd been tied. The rope was gone. The ground had been cleaned up, but the memory lingered. She looked out over the grasslands and waited. And just as the sun dipped low, she saw him. Far off, barely visible through the heat waves and golden light. The same lion, his silhouette unmistakable. He didn't come close this time. He just stood for a moment, watching her, then turned and walked away. No words. No dramatic moment. Just understanding. Sarah never tried to track him again. Some stories, she believed, were meant to stay wild. The reserve tightened security after that. New protocols were put in place. More patrols, better cameras. But for Sarah, the biggest change wasn't in the rules. It was in how she saw everything. For years, she had studied lions through the lens of science, behavior, territory, dominance hierarchies. But now she saw something deeper: connection, instinct, maybe even empathy. The lion didn't save her because he was trained. He wasn't tame. He wasn't a pet. He was wild through and through. But something in that moment had made him stay. Something had told him she didn't belong tied to that tree. And maybe, just maybe, he understood. As the weeks went on, Sarah returned to her patrols. Her cuts healed. The bruises faded. But what didn't fade was the story. Visitors to the reserve would ask her about it, wondering if it had all been exaggerated or imagined. She always smiled and gave the same answer. "I was there," she'd say. And so was he. And that was enough. Because in the middle of a dangerous plan, beneath the African sky, with no cameras rolling and no safety net in sight, a lion made a choice that no one expected. And in doing so, he reminded everyone that sometimes nature doesn't follow our rules. It writes its own stories, ones we'll be trying to understand for years to come.